Well, the head of Disney, which owns ABC, has told The View to tone down their anti Trump criticism. I think this is a great thing. It tells me that Iger understands that this constant visceral hatred of Trump and the woke stuff and this overbearing criticism isn't what audiences really want. Now, obviously, a news show, unlike the TV shows, should have a frequently a political slant and have political opinions. And I have no problem with politicians being criticized by news hosts, but I think it should be honest. I think it should be more balanced. If you're going to have a show with five panelists who ostensibly you would think some of them would have different opinions, they don't really, but you would think they should. I think it would be nice if you actually had more of an actual competitive viewpoint on The View, where they don't all just agree almost all the time, sort of like what you would have in more traditional news shows decades ago, but it's obviously long since passed. The directive was issued by Iger after the co-hosts were forced to issue 4 legal notes or disclaimers during a November broadcast. I actually remember this. They had to keep reading these notes. One of the ways to avoid reading these notes is to not lie so often, to try to speak with a certain level of balance and honesty. But obviously, the co-hosts of The View aren't having that. And one of the things you see is the co-hosts are being encouraged by their bosses to implement a balance on the show, a balance of topics. Not everything has to be related to Trump. I hope Iger is also remembering the way that this lack of balance in the woke politics of many of his shows, the race swapping of the characters, the constantly pushing diversity even when there's very little interest in the property. Like, for example, trying to force this Ironheart trailer that looks absolutely terrible out. And I'm sure they spent 100, 150 million on this series that is going to completely bomb. A more balanced look would be, okay, how can we just try to find properties that fans really connect with and then push that? I'm hoping this signals a larger shift in Iger's mind, where he's not just going to try to force balance and more neutrality on The View. He's going to force that on the showrunners who are creating the Disney shows. Now, Ironheart was was greenlit a long time ago. So obviously, the fact that that's coming out doesn't necessarily indicate something bad, because the shift happened a long time, because that was in production for a long time. And the fact that they're doing a very muted release of Ironheart, where they're not really advertising it much, they put the trailer only 40 days in front of the series release, which is very unusual, tells me that they're not trying to build up hype. They know it's going to be a bomb. One of the things when I noticed when I was reading through this article is that it said the View hosts didn't actually take the criticism well, but the fact that Iger reaffirmed his backing for The View, but also repeated calls to reduce political rhetoric at one of these Disney events. We talked to Anna Navarro, one of the hosts, tells me that he is really trying to force them to change their ways so they can attract new viewers and hopefully rescue the Disney company, which has had a stock that over the last 10, 15 years hasn't fared particularly well and has struggled to really, well, get a return on an investment, but also reinvigorate some of its big franchises like Star Wars and Marvel, which recently with Thunderbolts, which is, I'm not saying it's the worst movie, but it in the past that would have been $1 billion film, I bet. Now, particularly with consider all the inflation, hitting $1 billion isn't what it used to be a decade ago, right? I think this switch up by Disney is a very good sign. I hope he keeps pushing it. The fact that they settled this lawsuit with Trump means I think they're kind of de radicalizing a little bit. They don't want to be in the news because they didn't have to settle this. They could have fought it more, but they didn't want to be in the news and be this really controversial company. I think they're trying to help rescue their brand and focus on repositioning Disney as a media company that's more neutral in politics, which is good for a huge media company like Disney that really wants to sell its movies, its TV shows, its Disney parks to everyone, not just a certain section of the aisle. Overall, I'm happy with the way things are going, and I hope that Iger continues this path. But let me know what you guys think below. I think there's some promising signs, but he's just one man, and the fact that they're not following in line yet makes me think he's going to have a hard time wrestling control of the company back from the people who want to push wokeness into everything. Because they are, and certainly over the last decade or so, they have embedded themselves deeply in that organization. And they're not just going to go quietly and forget about all the woke stuff, the radicalism, and pushing, diversity, equity, and inclusion into all their products. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think Disney and Iger are really going to change the view and try to make the news and its TV shows and movies more balanced? Or do you think they're going to continue on pushing, race swapped characters, forced diversity, and all the rest of the usual woke stuff?